guys, it's Alec Torelli. Welcome back to the hand of the day. Today's question comes from Mikey, who is playing a 5-10 no limit game, and he's really deep stacked here, so it adds a lot of interesting dynamic to the hand, and I'm going to walk you through it step by step. First, actually, a little backstory about the hand that I think is really important to keep in mind throughout this hand, because your image plays so much into how you should be making decisions and how your opponents are going to make decisions against you. So Mikey tells me that he has a really tight image at the table and that his opponent is an extremely aggressive, extremely tight player that is also aggressive, and he's a really good solid pro. So Mikey has a tight image and his opponent has a tight image, and his opponent is also a really good thinking player. So those are the important things to keep in mind, and let's go to the hand. Mikey raises in mid position with 2 aces to $40. So he makes a big raise, which is fine at a 5-10 cash game when you have 300 big blinds, because you don't really want to price people in pre-flop. You could afford to raise more. That's totally fine. The opponent calls in the cutoff, and you're out of position 300 big blinds deep. Even though you have a great hand like aces, there's so many flops that just make it tough to play, and here you'll see one of them, but it's just a sticky spot to be in. Even though you have a great hand, being out of position against a good player is just never fun. So here we go, heads up to the flop. The pot's about $100, and the flop comes pretty terrible flop for you. It's 9-8-7. The good news is we have the ace of spades, so even though that flop is really dangerous for us, we have so much potential with our nut flush draw, which is extremely strong because we can make the nuts or really close to it. So that's great news. You go ahead and bet $65 here, which is about 2/3 the pot, and your opponent calls. I'm gonna take a second and analyze this bet because I think people think it's really standard to be betting here, but I think it's important to mix this up between betting and checking. I think betting here signifies a lot of strength, and you're not gonna be bluffing this flop. If you had something like ace queen of diamonds, you're probably just gonna check fold because this flop so likely connected with something that your opponent had. He can call you with, like, if you had ace queen of diamonds, for example, he could call you with any hand that has a big spade in it, like ace king or ace queen or ace jack, which he could have a spade because you don't have the ace of spades. And of course he could have any set or flop to straight or a flush. So there's a lot of possibilities that he could have here that are strong hands. And he's gonna call the flop with all those. So you're probably gonna check fold. So the times that you do bet, you're likely to have a really strong hand. And by mixing up checking, you make it harder to play against yourself because your opponent can't just fire with air and hope to take down the pot, because some of the time you're gonna have something when you check. I feel like, and while I don't know this about your game, I feel like my inclination is that so many players here just bet when they have something, but the times they check, they have absolutely nothing, and so they're just too easy to play against. So make sure you're mixing up checking here. Anyway, you go ahead and bet, which is fine. It's totally fine. And your opponent calls. The turn comes to queen of hearts, and we bet again. We bet 150, and which is kind of on the smaller side, it's about half the pot. And I expect your opponent here to be calling almost always. Any hand that he called the flop with is going to call the turn. The worst hand he has on this flop is something like 2 10s. Maybe he has something like 9-10 suited with no spade, but he probably has 2 10s or 2 jacks at the worst, and half the time he has a spade. So he's always going to call the turn again. So, I mean, betting is kind of like you're inflating the pot, and unless you improve on the river, it's really hard to win a lot of money in this hand because you're faced with a 1-pair hand on an extremely dangerous draw-heavy board where it's unlikely you're going to get paid off by much worse. So you're kind of inflating the pot out of position, and yes, you have a monster draw, but you're kind of relying on your draw at this point because you're never really going to win a ton of money in a big pot, and you're sort of inflating it. So again, I would probably check here and just check call because you could see the river no matter how much he bets, and then you could reevaluate then. But again, just the fact that your opponent called a bet on the flop, it's like he has something. He probably smashed this flop, and there's not many weak hands in his calling range. Again, I want you to think about that. There's not many weak hands he can call the flop with. The only weak hands he can have are like 10s, jacks, and queens. Now queens beats you, and the other hands are like sets of 9s, 8s, 7s, maybe 2-pair, maybe a straight, maybe a flush. So I don't even like my hand here. I think that the fact that he called the flop, and like if he calls the turn again, you're likely behind. even though that sounds crazy, but there's just like, you're playing full-handed poker. There's not many hands he calls with preflop, and he's not going to continue calling you with nothing. So I just think that your hand's not that great. Again, I would probably check. But anyway, you bet, which is fine because, you know, you can improve, and let's see what happens on the river. The river comes an offsuit ace. Now you have 3 of a kind. It sounds like your hand improved dramatically, like you made some huge hand on the river, but actually the only hands that you have improved against your opponent is a set, which you could have 9s, 8s, or 7s, or 2 pairs, which is like 9, 8. I guess he's going to be calling the river with all those hands, but most of the time that I think you play a big pot on the river, your opponent's going to have you beat. I think he's just more likely to have a flush or a straight. There's more combinations of that than sets, but of course at this point on the river, betting is fine. I mean, you got this far, you bet the whole way, you could bet, but it's just the other question to ask yourself is, like, he might pay you off with those hands I just told you, worse sets and some crazy 2 pairs, but like, what hands are you bluffing here with? Like, you don't bet the flop often on a bluff. You're probably never going to continue the turn on a bluff. And if you were bluffing, you most likely had ace-king with the ace of spades in your hand. And so now when you bet the river, it's like you're no longer bluffing with those hands. So the fact that you bet the river means like you actually had something, and ace-king or ace-jack with the ace of spades, those hands are always going to check the river. So it's kind of like when you bet the river, you're signifying so much strength. You bet really small, which is good. He could easily look you up with a worse hand, but it's just important to keep in mind that just the fact that he called the flop means that, like, in the turn means that his range is really strong. And I think a lot of the times you're going to be not being paid off when he has weak bluff catchers. He's never going to call the river with 2 10s or 2 jacks or something like that. He's just going to fold. And so you're never really going to get paid off light. And a lot of times he has you beat. So again, it's possible cause for checking. As played, I would bet the river with 2 aces here, but I would have checked somewhere earlier on in the hand. Now your opponent goes ahead and you get this dreaded spot where he raises you to 800, where all of our fears that we talked about in this whole video come true, and you realize that you don't have the best hand. It's impossible that he's raising you with a set here, or even a straight. He always has a flush, and he can't really be bluffing because he doesn't have any blockers, he doesn't have the ace of spades, and it's so unlikely that he's like turning a hand into a bluff on the river. Like, that's some like crazy play that people just don't make in this spot. Like, he's not bluffing you with 2 10s here now, right? So it's really likely that he has you beat, and he always has you beat, and it's like extremely likely that he has a flush. So you have to ask yourself, what flushes can he have? You told me you're thinking about 3-betting the river here, and you went on to make it 1800, and your logic was, well, I have the nut flush blocker, and you know, he's probably going to fold 95% of his range. While it's true that he's going to be folding like 95% of the possible hands he has on the river, the hands he's raising you with aren't that many. And of those hands he's raising you with, that's the range you need to consider how often he's folding. It's not about like all the possible hands he has, it's only about the hands he raises you with, because that's his new range. And those hands, to be honest with you, my friend, are only flushes, and they're only big flushes. So you have the ace of spades, so he can have 10 jack of spades, which of course he's not folding, 6-5 of spades, he's not folding. He could have queen 10 of spades, king 10 of spades, king jack of spades, king queen of spades, and that's it. So you're basically hoping that he's gonna raise the river and then fold like a queen high flush or a king high flush. And there's only 2 combinations of queen high flushes and 3 combinations of king high flushes. There's 2 combinations of straight flushes. So it's like 20% of the time he has a straight flush here. I mean, it's like, kind of sounds crazy to think that it's like that likely he has a straight flush, but like he has a straight flush like a decent amount of the time, given how hard it is to make a friggin' straight flush. So the other side of the coin is if he's not gonna fold the king high flush specifically, then raising here I think is really bad. That being said, if you do raise here, and if he is the capable player to fold the king high flush because nobody ever 3-bets the river without the nuts, that's fine logic, but you should shove here. You shouldn't like let him talk himself into saying, oh my gosh, it's only 1,000 and now I raised and the pot is 2,600, so I'm getting good odds to call, and he like talks himself into all this stuff, and then he ends up making a hero call with a king high flush and you're out the money. It's much better if you're gonna really sell this story, sell it, man. Like, go all in and just ship 2,700 and put him to the test and make him call off his entire stack if he wants to see you bluffing. I think that's much more credible, and I think that if you had the nuts, you would just shove. So I would just shove on a bluff too. Although again, I think that there's times that it's warranted to bluff with a nut flush blocker, if you will. And of course, you know, it's like good to be able to have bluffs in this spot, but I think it's pretty ambitious just because there's so few hands that he has. Again, unless he's folding the king high flush, I just think it's too ambitious, my friend. That's it for the hand of the day. I know it's a lot. It was a cool hand, a lot of moving parts there, and you know, hopefully good feedback on every street, give you some food for thought to think about. If you like this hand and want to go more detail into your own personal poker game, your poker career, and you want to take your game to the next level, head on over to my blog, alectorelli.com, and click on Work With Me. I'm taking on new private clients, and I work on with my coaching practice. Focus on a lot more of this, a lot more in depth, and really cool stuff to help you kick some butt. Otherwise, if you just have more hands of the day you'd like to send to me, subscribe to my blog, enter your name and email in the header, and just respond to the welcome email. Super simple, just shoot me your hand and I'll select the best ones to go on this channel. Subscribe to my YouTube channel too. Don't forget there's subscribe buttons floating around here, so click that and you'll always be the first to know when more of these cool videos come your way. Till next time, thanks for watching and I'll see you next week. Cheers.
I mean, it's really hard to be bluffing.
That part's true.
You're special.
That's what I've been told.
Alec is getting almost 3 to 1.